Hello there, and welcome back to the Measured Golf YouTube channel. We hope you're learning lots about golf and can take some of this information and help yourself play some of the best golf of your life. So one of the really most important crazy things you ever hear about on social media is how the wrists do this and the wrists do that. And to be honest, there's more devices and tools and training aids for wrist function than almost any other part of the golf swing. So what I think would be really cool is if instead of trying to add more confusion to what the wrists are doing during the golf swing, I think it'd be really great if we could actually talk about what they actually do, what they're intended to be used for, and how we can simplify this down to an easier way to understand what we should be doing with our hands during the golf swing. All right, so talking about the wrist and how can we make this simple? Well, that's the hard thing with wrist because they're not simple. They move in 3 dimensions just like everything else, being 3-dimensional beings. So not only do they move in 3 dimensions, but they also move very quick and fast and are very twitchy. So that's why a lot of golfers will turn to their wrist to save them at the very last second of their golf swing and try to create a face that's going to be agreeable with their target. So what do the wrists do? Let's start there. So the wrists actually have 3 functions like we talked about. The wrist can move up and down in terms of radial and ulnar deviation. The wrist can move side to side in terms of extension, flexion, and then the wrist can also pronate and supinate. So what do we want to happen during the golf swing? Well, the cool thing is that if I grab a golf club, if I take it and I hold it just like this in front of me, and I radial and ulnar deviate my wrist, we can see that the effect on the club face is nil or 0. So that doesn't change my face. Just like if I take and I extend and flex my wrist, once again, the effect on my face is nothing. Now, this is where it gets confusing for some, because some people will say that that face is open, just like that face is closed. But in reality, and relative to an arc, that face is square relative to the arc, just like that face is square relative to the arc. And as a matter of fact, if we don't let the lead wrist go into extension, we can't actually get the club head to turn the corner. And I think that that's where we should start this conversation, because what we tend to see on the lesson tee quite a bit is a lot of people that are known as quote unquote handle draggers. And we know who they are, right? Because when we follow them at the range for a practice session, we pretty quickly know that Terry was just here because the divots are about yay deep. So we don't want to be a handle dragger that's really having to lower our center of mass towards the ground to make the club hit the ground because we've actually shortened the lever by bending the wrist. So what do the wrists do? We've talked about this. Now, what do they do when it comes to the golf swing? Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Because I think what we've seen in the past due to the Balata golf ball is that we were trying to use the wrist when we played with a Balata ball to keep all of the loft out of the equation at impact. Well, why would we do that? Well, the Balata golf ball wanted to spin, so we needed something to take spin off the ball and drive it out low, so we just took all the loft out of the equation. But now that we're playing with a urethane golf ball that doesn't want to spin, we need the loft once again, because if we don't have the loft, and the ball doesn't want to spin, then we hit knuckleballs and flyers. So what is it the wrist should be doing if it's not hanging on? Well, we think about swinging a golf club, but we also could think about throwing a ball. When we throw a ball, at some point we let go of that ball. Well, we could call that a release. There's also a release in the golf swing. And as we said, I know some people would be terrified of a little extension of flexion in their golf swing, because they tend to think that they're going to shut the face and hit it left. But in reality, what tends to get the face shut for most golfers is coming into the ball with too much ulnar deviation, which then takes away the ability for the lead wrist to extend. I can't even do it from this position. So now the only thing I'm left with is pronation, which gets my right forearm crossing over my left forearm. And that would be the dreaded flip. So when we talk about the wrist action, we're actually saying that extension and flexion is okay, and we're saying pronation, supination is bad. So what we want to try to do here is we want to try to minimize all 3 wrist actions. So when we think about throwing a ball, or we think about throwing a dart, or anytime we're using our hands and our fingers to throw a projectile, generally speaking, in most endeavors, we don't actually think about what our wrist and hands are doing. I challenge you to go play darts and think about the function of your wrist and your fingers as you're playing darts. You will get substantially worse. So what we want to do is we want to allow for the body to be able to do the heavy lifting of the swing, and then we want to use our smaller, twitchier muscles and let them kind of naturally do what they're naturally ingrained to do. So when we think about the golf swing and we think about the quote unquote release, what we're talking about here is letting the club head pass the hands along the arc. That would be the release or the let go, right? We have to get the club head to release. Now, where this gets a little bit interesting, I think, is when we start talking about this, people start doing things like this and they go, well, I sure don't want to be there at impact. That would be terrible. But what we have to realize is we would never be static like this with our lower body at this point in our golf swing. We're going to have our left hip pushed back and up, and then we're also going to not have our our right elbow so far behind, and we can see that my left arm is going to be forward. So that actually works out pretty well. So we want to be able to get our wrist to be able to turn the corner, and that allows us to rotate our body all the way through to finish. So it's very, very important that we're allowing for the extension flexion in the wrist and not trying to take the loft out of the equation and keeping the extension flexion in the wrist through the hitting segment. All right, so we've talked about the function of the wrist and what they do, and more importantly, how they start to tie into the golf swing and how they could lead to the symptom of handle dragging or taking super deep divots on the driving range. So what are some things we can do to start kind of thinking about the wrist, developing some feels, and maybe even some drills to really make sure that those feels turn into real? So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of think about what happens during the actual golf swing, right? So when we take the golf club and we swing it back, one thing that's important to remember is that as the club head is going back, the relationship between the club head and the hands changes. So when I set up to hit the golf ball, we can clearly see that my hands are above the club head. But as I take the golf club back, we can see that now my hands are below the club head. So I've actually inverted that relationship. So we need to make sure that we are taking the golf club and getting the head back down and not necessarily just dragging the butt of the club straight down. So if I was trying to keep the club inverted, it would make sense to want to hang on to this wrist and stay into that radial deviation. But what we actually want to feel like we're doing is we want to feel like from the top, we're actually trying to get the club head down and release the club down the line. So where I think a lot of people have a difficult time here is just generally when we think about where the hands go in the golf swing, we'll see that a lot of people get set up and we can clearly see that the club head is on that orange stick there, and this orange stick is underneath my hands. So as I take the club up to the top, one thing that's really, really important to understand is that I need my hands to come back down on their line and then the club head go out to its line. We don't want to see the hands going out to their line, because generally why that happens is because we're hanging on to this grip for much too long and staying into that radial deviation. So now what ends up happening, here comes the deep divot, is that now because the club is shorter, the distance, because of the bend in the wrist is shorter to the ground, now I have to lower my center of mass and twist my wrist to try to square the face. And we see a lot of people get into this position, but then from here we see that they can't keep the dynamic lie of the shaft down and the club wants to go up on them. So what we want to do is not hang on and resist. We don't want to feel like we hang on to the dart as we throw the arm. We don't want to feel like we hang on to the ball as we throw the arm. We want to let everything release. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we get up here to the top of our swing nice and neat. And then from here, we're going to work those hands more down their line instead of letting the hands work out more towards the ball line. And then we can see that now we're going to need to let those wrists go to get the club head out to its line. And now we can see we've got the hands back to their original position above the club. And more importantly, now we can go ahead and let the club head turn the corner, because we're not resisting the release of the club head around the hands. Rather, we're letting everything work together and allowing the club to move around the body and allowing for the body to pivot around the spine. Thanks so much for watching this video on wrist angles, how we use them, what they mean, and how they interact with your golf swing. We really hope that you can take some of this information and some of these drills and apply them to your own golf game. And as a matter of fact, if you have some success with that, let us know about it in the comment section, and make sure to subscribe and follow so that you're always getting the latest videos from Measured Golf. So thanks so much. Make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, keep grinding.